We're going to go pro.
Yeah, you can have like a little board pulled up with different buttons and effects, and you can play them.
We get paid for this?
That's true.
Okay. All right. We want to, as it says, start recording in 3.
I have no idea. I don't know. I'm just kind of along for the ride.
All right. Welcome to the first ever episode of the Western Heights podcast. My name is Terrance Cottle. I'm the newest member of our triad. Why don't we throw it around the room and let's talk about who's with us.
We're a trio, huh?
We are.
Kind of like the Three Musketeers.
We're a triad.
Triad. That helps us to stand better. Yes. Well, I'm Rusty Sherry. I'm the associate minister here, and I've been here for a long time.
How long?
Actually, the first day on the job was...
Well, don't give us a daily report of all the days.
7th, 1987. So it's been a long time.
And so you were...
Terrance, how old were you?
In 1987, I was -6.
That's what I thought. Just, yeah.
Yeah, so I always joke, you started as the associate minister working with youth, quote unquote, at the Travis Street Church of Christ.
Correct.
And somewhere along the way, you became the actual youth minister at the Western Heights Church of Christ. And now you're the associate minister again, but now you're really an associate minister.
That's one way to describe it, yes. Yeah, the title was associate minister, but the responsibility was youth ministry in the job description that they gave me, other than speaking once a month on Sunday nights. Until I spoke about 2 or 3 times, and then one of the elders said, "Hey, do you really want to do this?" I said, "No, I thought that's what you wanted to do." "Well, we pay Joe Ed for that, so yeah, you don't need to preach anymore."
So speaking of Joe
apparently I
Ed,
did not do well.
we want to introduce the other guy who's here.
Oh, sure.
It's not Joe Ed.
It's not Joe
Tell
Ed.
us who you are.
Well, I'm Mitch Wiggins. I'm the preaching minister. I've been here for over 12 years, 12 and a half years. And so not near as long as Rusty, but it's starting to feel that way sometimes.
Yeah. And so this is our just community podcast that we're putting together for basically the church, for members. If you're not a member of the church and you found this because of a viral clip, I don't know, wash your hands more. If you just found us otherwise, that's fine. But yeah, it's our community podcast for the Western Heights Church. So tell us something funny that happened, guys. Sunday. Tell us some funny stories. That's what people with podcasts do. They tell funny stories.
Is that what they do?
Yeah.
Sure,
Just funny stories from Sunday?
I believe Mitch just told everybody also if they have questions about the sermon, if they have comments about the sermon, particularly questions and positive comments. If you have negative comments about the sermon, save those for in person. But if you have positive about the sermon or questions, yeah, email us, comment us, send us messages on Facebook.
How do they email us?
Well,
I can tell you what they don't use.
I'll tell you what's going to come with that is I'm going to try to make it easier that I'll plan on putting a form that they can fill out as part of the QR code a little bit later. But I don't know. Every Sunday, I feel like there's something that comes up, and some of it seems just normal, and some of it doesn't. But really, if you just want a story, I can give you a quick story. This past weekend, my daughter had a soccer tournament, and then I had to take her to Winterfest. And I know you'll talk more about that because that's something where Terrance was this weekend, and something Rusty and I have been to before, and we love it. But I got to meet up with one of my cohort guys that's part of my doctoral program, and that was a delightful day to hang out with my daughter, to drive 7 hours in the car to shuttle her around to the places. But those are moments that you just enjoy, is all the conversations you get to have, and watching her do her thing, and then sending her off for a weekend of spiritual nourishment. And so I don't know, that to me, my story is not much about Sunday morning. It's more so about life and what that looked like for me this weekend.
Yeah, for being an after Sunday podcast, we picked a Sunday that we actually all were mostly different places over the weekend.
We were, yeah. So I was doing a lot of driving on Saturday, going to Frisco for a basketball game for one of my grandsons, and then coming back to Sherman, and then driving back to Fort Worth, going to Fort Worth for a wedding, and then come back from that. So I think I drove about 5 hours, maybe 5.5 or something like that on that day. But
I might have you guys beat. I think I went to Fort Worth 4 times in 3 days, but one of them was unrelated to.
Yeah, you're having to drive back and forth a little bit. Mm.
But I guess the main purpose, reason we've gathered here today, we would say, as preachers for a funeral or a wedding at least, is
It's
we-
not the same thing
we've gathered
podcast.
here. We've gathered here today. Let's talk about holiness, or really, let's talk about Sunday. Is what we'll usually do with our format here. Is we'll talk about Sunday. We'll talk about some events and some news and some things going on. But we'll start with this new series that we have started. So why holiness?
Well, I mean, I'm going to send this over to Rusty maybe to chat a little bit more about why holiness, because I'll get it started. I'll prime the pump a little bit. It's the theme for the year, the focus of the year. And a lot of the story within that is for the past 12 years, we've had a yearly focus, sometimes more explicitly, sometimes more implicitly, but we've always tried to have a yearly focus that guides a few things, guides some lessons, guides some of the things that we try to accomplish in that year. But we've come off the discussion on 4 or 5 years of focusing on discipleship and different facets of that. And that led us into we kind of completed that idea. And so it led us into what are we going to do 2026? And so you want to pick up the story of how we got to 2026?
Well, yeah, we were trying to actually figure out what we would do this next year, what our focus would be. And in one of our leadership meetings, which is basically the ministers and elders, one of the elders had mentioned the idea that he'd really been thinking about that idea of holiness for quite some time, and how um, really, when you think about where we're at in the world and how we are in some ways separate from the world, even though we're in the world, what does it look like for us to be holy? If we're really God's people, His holy people, what does that look like? He wondered whether that could be something that we focus on. And as we began to talk about that more, it was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. That seems like a good place for us to go this year. And so as we were throwing the ideas around and doing some study, um, that's kind of where we ended up. And that for our focus for this coming year.
Yeah. And the whole idea was not just holiness in isolation, but how
Right.
holiness speaks into discipleship.
Right.
So we're not walking away
Yeah.
from the discipleship idea. We're trying to
Mhm.
actually enhance it by understanding how holiness uh, informs discipleship, how it
Mhm.
holds it in a lot of ways, and it drives us even closer to God.
Right.
So then for this sermon series, this series was not something that I originally planned to do as the first series for this year in holiness. We talked as a staff, spitballing different ideas that are on my whiteboard about different stories of holiness. And I kept on looking at that, going like, you've got Moses on the mountain, or with the burning bush. You've got Daniel in the lion's den. A lot of neat representations of what it means to actively live out holiness. But it felt like I was starting in the middle of a story. And so the reason started this series was because I wanted to go back to the original holiness code, which is the book of Leviticus. And so that's why we are diving into Leviticus, is because that's where God spells out. You see it in Exodus somewhat, but he really spells out the here's what it looks like to approach a holy God. And so I figured that was good grounding for us, that we could then talk about the stories a little bit later on and have a little bit more connection, I think.
Yeah, Leviticus seems like an odd place to start a sermon series, especially in the new year, if you're going to get anybody coming in for the first time. But
Welcome to
once you
church.
kind of unveil, we're talking about holiness, it's like, well, where else are you going to begin? What other book is more literally exclusively about holiness? And so when you began Sunday, you started with the question that I liked the phrasing of this. How can an unholy people approach a holy God? And I think sometimes we would buck against, as the church, like, well, we're not unholy. We're the holy nation. And we're the priesthood, and we're the this and that, and we're all X, Y, or Z. When you say unholy people, especially in a book that is so heavily about unholiness, holiness, uncleanliness, cleanliness, what do you, in that biblical sense, what do you mean when you throw that label out there? An unholy people.
I think unholiness is something that we do relate to, whether we like it or not, because the more that we know about ourselves, the more that we know about God, we know that there is a disconnect. And yes, you're right. We often lean upon the New Testament understanding, hey, we are a holy nation, a holy priesthood. We have that holiness, and we almost can take it for granted. But the thing is, when when we understand that God is holy, that He is the beginning of holiness, and He is the author of holiness, and something I get into later in the sermon is that He invites us into His holiness. Um, when we understand that, then it really we have a clear picture of ourselves of saying, I am not. So whether we want to understand it through the lens of I'm a sinful person because I have done things against God, we can understand it through the lens of I'm a broken person because I know I'm not all put together. Even the facade that I might give to other people looks all complete, but inside I know. We can understand it that way, but I think there's a level in which all of us we know our unholiness, even if those aren't the words that we would use.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that explanation. There's a lot of language that we are sort of scared of in the church that we kind of shy away from, that we don't like embracing. And certainly holiness is one we're free to talk about in sort of this higher level abstract way. But I like something else you followed that up with, is that it's not just abstract, but it's also not just this do's and don'ts. And you said a few things. You listed it's about worship, community, justice, compassion, and nearness to God. That last one really resonated with me because I remember when I was an undergrad, one of the first classes was, I think, Story of Israel, and our professor, he was asking class, he's like, what is holiness? What does the Bible say holiness is? And we were throwing all these words out, and he's like, "Yep, sort of, sort of, sort of, yeah." And he said, ultimately, what it is holiness is who God is. God is holy above all other things. It's the only thing the Bible says that He is, in that very over and over again kind of way of holy, holy, holy. It's the only one. It's the only thing that's said three times. We never say that God is big, 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 or that He is glorious, 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 or magnificent, magnificent, and large. And He is all those other things. But the one thing that He almost seems to exclusively be, and that we only are when we are in relation to Him, is holy. And so He said, there's a circular definition of holiness, in that holiness is what God is. Well, what is God? Well, the main thing God is He's holy. He said there's a circularness there, but that's intentional.
Yeah, what's interesting though is that's not how we've understood it, right, in the past.
Yeah.
I mean, so I may be moving on too fast, but we have a tendency. When a lot of times what people think of when they think of what's holy, or how do you become holy? You become perfect. That means you don't make any mistakes.
Yeah.
You always do the right thing. And then that gets pretty discouraging because I can't always do the right thing because I just mess up all the time. So how am I going to ever be holy? Well, I might as well give up on that one because that's not going to work.
Yeah, I
But,
mean, I've
but
talked to people who
yeah,
leave the church because they're like, "Well, I could never be the standard that I see people outwardly portray of like what it means to be a Christian." It's just, I mean, before we get holier than thou, you know?
yeah, yeah. But when you talk about it in the sense of your nearness to God, that's something that I think can resonate and even gives us hope.
Yeah,
And yet it's pretty scary getting near to God.
yeah, yeah. You look at the biblical history of people getting near to God is not always happiness. It's
No.
the Indiana Jones melting face and bleeding ears, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, even the children of Israel, when God spoke to them the 10 Commandments, their first response to Moses after that was, "Would you please talk to him? Because we don't want to talk to him anymore. We don't want to hear from him because we're afraid we're going to die."
Yeah, the,
And
the
so
the
it was
thunder and
almost like they were
mountain.
pushing him away because they were so afraid of what they were hearing and seeing and the holiness behind it all.
They wanted the holiness by proxy.
Yeah.
You go be holy for us.
Yeah.
So, going back to Mitch, you said another thing you said Sunday is it's an easy book to skip. I don't think you would get a lot of disagreement on that one.
No.
I imagine most of this series is going to directly or indirectly kind of walk us through the importance of this book, but give us like a little teaser, a little trailer, a little hint, or maybe just a summary. But why, if the average Christian is reading their Bible today, they're going through a reading plan, they have the misfortune of going through just a straight in February we're going to get to Leviticus. what should they take away from that when they're reading that? Because they don't have goats, they don't have any chickens that they're giving to God, they don't have a place to go wash, they don't have a temple, they're not building a big tent in their backyard. So, what should Christians reading the Bible today take away from Leviticus?
Oh boy. So, there's so much in Leviticus, and let me give you a quick side note. I mentioned this to the Wednesday night class whenever I was telling them I was starting in Leviticus, that part of my story with this book, specifically started before I even went into college to learn how to preach or teach or anything. I was in high school at a small, congregation up in Ray, Colorado, and they knew I wanted to go into ministry, and so and I was the youth group at that time. There was no other, and so I was just part of the single adult class of this small congregation, and they just said, "Hey, if you want, you can teach the next, the next book is coming up. You can teach the next book." I was like, "Well, great, that would be fun. What is the next book?" And they're like, "Leviticus." So the very first book that I ever taught, very first class that I ever taught, was in the book of Leviticus, and there were certain things that a 17-year-old uh, doesn't really have a grasp for. Whenever we hit some of the cleanliness code, and different bodily emissions and
Oh,
things like
yeah.
that, I would read it and be like, "I'm too young, discuss among yourselves." But the thing is, what I took away from that was an appreciation for a book that was weird. Like, there's a bunch of weird things in there, um, and so you mentioned I mentioned on Sunday the Bible reading plan that, Leviticus will kill it often, but you even mentioned when we get to it in February. This series, for those of us that are reading, on the Bible recap for the year, this series should end the week that, you start Leviticus, and
So when people
so
think they're over it, they're actually just gonna be just getting into it.
oh, yeah, but the hope is, I will give you through these 4 sermons, that's the plan is the 4, I might add a 5th, focusing on atonement because that's a big idea, but that's yet to be determined. But these 4 sermons should at least give you some grounding as you walk through it that week, because thankfully it only takes a week of your Bible reading plan to make it through. But my hope is that you'll get some appreciation for high level views. What are the offerings about? What is the priesthood about? What is the people about? What does it mean for a people to be holy? And then the last one with the land or the festivals and the things that we can do that are very practical. So there are some interesting tidbits throughout Leviticus, and I hope to highlight some of those. But to me, that's probably the best things that you're going to take away from the book of Leviticus is just at one idea that kind of grabs you, and you're like, "That's really neat." For a long time, to me, it was this idea of a free bird, one of the sacrifices for cleanliness of a house or of leprosy. I think it's later on is that they would take 2 birds, and one of them they would kill, and then the other they would dunk in the water of the it's really kind of weird, the water where they spilt the blood of the other bird. They would dunk this bird into the death of the other bird and then let it fly. And just that whole idea that what do you think that free bird thought? What do you think? Like, isn't that us? And like just connecting it to my story. Um, if we don't treat Leviticus like a distant past book, we say, what can I connect to my story? You're going to
Right.
find some things.
What can I pull out of it? What can I extract? How can I do something with this? You you were talking about your early days and jumping into Leviticus when you first started preaching. I was in Memphis, not Cersei yet. I was in Memphis for my intensive when I was in Harding, and they were still in Memphis. And you're there for the whole week, and so Wednesday night, of course, especially HST, they've got a ton of professors who are all affiliated with different churches in the Memphis area. And one of them had said, "Hey, I'd love for you to come try us out." It was not one of the bigger ones. It's probably not one of the ones most people have heard of. And he said, "We just have a really kind of typical, average congregational Bible study on the auditorium. Not a lot going on. Love for you to come join us." I said, "Okay." I get in there and I'm meeting and greeting people, and they're asking me who I am and how I know the guy, and we're talking. And up on the board, on the big whiteboard that's been wheeled in the front of the auditorium, I just see an exclamation marker, Leviticus 17. And if you're following along at home, I'll let you look up what Leviticus 17 is about.
Nice.
But I flip to it in my Bible, and I just sort of sit back in my chair and I go, okay, let's see how this is going to go.
This will be fun.
And man, it was kind of interesting because he didn't skip a beat, he didn't pull any punches, and when I say it was an old school style, quote unquote, Bible class, there was not classes for little kids that people were getting sent off to. This is whole families, both genders, all ages, and he is launching in to Leviticus 17. And he's just said, "Hey, we're in the chapter by chapter or chunks of the Bible through this Bible reading, and this is where we're at. So this is what we're gonna do." And I kind of appreciated the freshness with which he was just like, "Yeah, I mean, we're reading the Bible, we're reading through the Bible, so we're gonna read through the Bible, including parts of this." I bet later that year when they got the Song of Songs, they probably read through all of Song of Songs in a congregational Bible study. One of the verses that we started Sunday with was Leviticus 1 1 through 9. And Leviticus 1 starts in kind of a odd way. It seems pretty normal. It's that the Lord was speaking to Moses, and Moses was outside of the tent. But then we go to Numbers, and something has changed. And so I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about that. And if we look at how Exodus ends, that there's something going on with the presence of the Lord and Moses and distance and drawing near to God and the whole holiness thing. There's something happening here that unfolds through Leviticus that I wanted you guys to speak to a little bit, if possible. Just basically
What do
the
you want us to speak to? What is it you're trying to say? So in Numbers,
Not just on, but even in. Yeah. So much so that Moses could no longer enter the tabernacle because the cloud had settled down over it. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. So Moses is on the outside
looking in,
looking in.
basically. Yeah.
Okay.
And then what you have in Leviticus is that God is speaking to Moses from the tabernacle.
The language looks like it's from the tabernacle. He's speaking to Moses, or at least calling him from, saying, "Hey, now come in," or "come to," maybe is the better word.
And then in the first verse of Numbers, it's the Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting. So I guess you're asking about that transition from drawing near in presence of him?
clearly whatever has happened in Leviticus, which is, as we said, it's the holiness code. It's literally it's the only part of the Bible that is actually written the way the people think the Bible is written, right? A lot of times people think the Bible is just this list of do's and do nots. Well, like 90% of the Bible is not that way, but Leviticus actually is. And so it seems like it's just this giving of the code, but clearly between the beginning of it and the end of it, something has
Something's happened.
changed.
And so I hadn't thought about this before you brought that up, but in our class on Sunday morning, we were talking about holiness as well, or reflecting the glory of God. And we've got to a point in our class where we talk about how it's a process. It's a transformation that occurs. And it looks, at least to me, as we're talking through this right now, that there is this transformation that's taking place, in a sense. As far as a process that's occurring, Moses is distant. God speaks to him. He eventually calls him in and talks to him there. And later on we read, actually even in Exodus itself, that he would go and speak to God face to face as a man would to his friend at the tent of meeting. So there is this process that seems to be occurring. And I guess you could think of it in a sense of, even in our lives, there is a process that occurs. We may not be able to explain it all completely, but there is a process of transformation, maybe in the
We can build it. We can build this tabernacle. We can start with that of inviting God in, and when God fills it, then where do I fit? What does that look like? And then God, in turn, invites us, saying, "You fit with me. This is how it works. This is what it looks like." How Again, back to that question: how can an unholy people approach the holy God? It's His invitation, and He brings us in. And so, yeah, I like that. I don't know all the ins and outs of what might be happening there, but I do think beginning of Leviticus, beginning of Numbers, kind of point to something interesting.
When there's a lot of things like that when we read the Old Testament that you go, I don't really know what's happening there, but clearly something is. One of the famous examples I point to is the Jacob wrestling with God in the Western, American, Aesop's fables, whatever way of understanding a story, the moral of the story is at the end. And at the end, they go, and that's why you don't eat the meat of the thigh. It's like, that's why he was wrestling an angel, is so you don't eat the meat of, that doesn't make any sense at all. So there's clearly something more going to that story. It's like, and then you get into the whole, is it an angel, is it God thing? But there's a couple things from Sunday that I want to get to. And for the sake of time, we'll kind of shift gears a little bit. A little later on, so the thrust of your lesson was that when we were studying Leviticus, there's the offerer, the offering, and the priest, who is the mediator. And I guess you couldn't think of a synonym for priest that began with O.
Yes, true. Yeah.
You had
Didn't even think of
the
that.
preacherly alliteration.
Not a great preacher then. I didn't have it all covered.
But then you twist and you say, and Jesus is all three of these in these different ways. But something you start with on the offerer, who's us, the worshipers, the one who seek to draw near to God, is you said a quote that I'm going to, with your permission, completely take out of context and then challenge you with. God takes the guesswork out of how we please him. Do you want to stand by that, or do we want to qualify that, conditional that? How do we feel about that one?
Well,
God takes the guesswork out of how to please him, which is why we all always agree on how to do that.
Yeah, so since you're going to take it out of context, I feel like I should qualify it then. In context, what I was saying is, if you take it again back to what you were saying, the end of Exodus coming into Leviticus, if you think of the wilderness wanderings, like these people have seen a lot. They have seen, one of my Bible professors at Harding called it big juju. You know, they've seen the big juju of God. They've seen crazy power through, whether it was through the plagues in Egypt or parting of the Red Sea, water from a rock, lightning and voice from this mountain. All of these things that they've seen, all these things that have isolated and really told them that this God is not like them. And so the question, how do we be in relationship with this? How do we be in relationship with God? So in Leviticus, God takes out the guesswork. He says, here's how you be in relationship with me, is there are certain things you do, but he starts with approach. Here's how to approach me. Here's how it looks. And so that's in context. Now to put it in our lives, yeah, I think we debate what it is that that God really wants. What does it look like? Scripture has some pretty simple lists. In the Micah, it says that what does the Lord want? Is he pleased with all these rams, rivers of olive oil, and all this? No, what he wants is for you to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. Makes it very simple in a lot of ways. Or we could even take it to the New Testament of what Jesus would say of what is the greatest command.
Yeah.
Love God, to pare it down very simply, love God and love others.
Right.
We debate on how. We often put maybe some words in God's mouth, and that's what we debate on. But I do think God has taken the guesswork even for us. Even when we disagree, it's usually on the minutia of it, or usually on the opinions, not on what God has made clear.
Yeah. We do a little bit of what we see the Pharisees do, some of, or really just even the lawyers and scribes that came long after Moses and the prophets, of like, well, what if someone was on the Sabbath and they weren't working, but they fell down into a well and then they had to work to get themselves out of the well? Is it right to do a good thing, or is it against the Sabbath to do a good thing? And we try and like lawyer up to God. Something I've described Jesus's reframing of the law as many times is it's way more simple and way more difficult. He takes the 300 things and he says, do these two things. Now it's way easier to say, no, here's the 10%, here's the one of my sheep, here's the first of my goats. Here you go, just take that and I'll be good. Our sins will be fine till I see you again next time. And he's like, no, love God before everything and love others like as much as you love yourself. Like all the time, every day. Like it's way harder. It's simpler, but it's harder.
So I want to jump into something else with that. There's something that we had mentioned before, drawing near to God. I was thinking as you were talking about that, doesn't that cause us, or shouldn't it cause us, to look deeper into his word, to understand better who God is? So, for instance, if I want to know how to love someone, don't I need to look to see how God, who is love, how he loves people? And therefore, if as I'm drawing into that relationship, then again, a process that's occurring. I'm struggling with his word. I mean, it's meditation literature anyway, in a sense. I mean, a lot of it, the Old Testament especially, is looked upon that way. That um, that I am struggling with this and drawing near to God so that I can be more like him and understand what he would do in that situation.
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, when I've not done, I've probably done the least marital counseling of anybody in this room. But when I have counseled people in relationships for marital type stuff, something I say is we need to learn how to love from God's love. If it says God is love, we need to learn how to love from his love. So yeah, I totally agree with that. There was another note that I just thought was interesting when you were talking about the offering. You mentioned really quickly that it gives us the in that passage you threw on the screen, it gives us that you can do this, or you can give the offering for the poor, which is the birds, without getting too much into the agrarian society and why one is easier and cheaper and really more accessible than the other. I think there's a fascinating detail when we go to the New Testament, and it gets nothing but like a side mention, and it's in Luke 2:22. And Luke is the only gospel that really tells us about childhood Jesus. And it says, and when the time came for their purification according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every male who first opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice according to what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or two young pigeons. And something that tells us, without telling us, and it tells the Jews, it would tell the people who knew, is that he did not come from a landed, established, a large, wealthy family. They were making what would have been just jokingly or derogatorily called the poor offering, the offering that poor people made. So it's this interesting detail about Jesus that he literally comes from this family who they can't even really give the quote unquote real offering, but yet from this family is the most real offering anyone ever gave.
Yeah, and I really like that because one of the things I say in the sermon, and you alluded to it, is that Jesus fulfills all of this. I think Leviticus is so much about Jesus, which is maybe another takeaway that we can have, but, like, that's one of the small ones that is actually not so small. Um, we can connect anybody can connect with Jesus because, he gives them ways to connect. So the poor have an immediate one, not just that he loved the poor, he literally walked in that life. He That's what he grew up in, is what we would consider a more poor family.
It makes me wonder, the story about the woman who gave just the two small coins, and Jesus uses her as an example after looking at everybody else giving all these things, and that he uses her as an example. She gave all that she had.
Uh-huh.
So I wonder if he was thinking about maybe this. I don't know if he
Yeah.
was. I'm just guessing, but thinking back to, what about my family?
Exactly.
So just a thought.
Oh yeah. In that same section, there's another line that really struck me, and this was the idea that in Leviticus, in the Holiness Code, sin is not brushed aside, nor is the sinner cast away. That sin is not just swept under the rug, but the person who sins is dealt with. They are reconciled. They are brought before God to have something be done with them in a way that is not the ultimate and final judgment, which we do see plenty of other times as we get into Joshua, as we get into Chronicles, as we see in the Kings. There's plenty of times where God's judgment is swift, immediate, and final. But what we actually see in the Holiness Code, the book of the law, is that they're not just cast away. There's a way of dealing with that. And so when I thought about that really through the lens of not just the church, but Christians throughout time, they've wrestled with this in different ways. And they've maybe leaned, or I would say, turned to the right or the left on this at different times. Of we would rather just brush aside sin, or maybe sometimes we would rather cast out the sinner. But in God, as Paul would say, all things are reconciled.
Yeah, I think you're right, that there's a tension there because, when we land one way or the other, it gets us into trouble. So if we, aren't serious about sin and we just say, "Hey, we are called to love the person no matter what, which is true. I'm trying to think of another way to say that, of saying we love them and don't expect them to change. Don't expect them to deal with the sin in their life or ourselves. If we are light on sin, it really creates bad situations. It fosters more sin, and it really, I don't know, puts us down the wrong road. But on the other side, if we have such a harsh view of sin with no love for people, then there's no room for anybody, because we all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so that takes us all out of the equation, because we 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 have leaned so far on the other side. I think what the Holiness Code teaches us is how both are in tension with one another, and they need to stay that way. That you need both this deal with sin, but don't cast the sinner away.
So it was, I'm throwing something in here that you don't even have in your notes. So sorry,
Not
I
allowed.
get sidetracked. You highlighted the fact that, Mitch, talking to Mitch, that you highlighted the fact that in Leviticus 1, what it's showing us is that the person who's bringing the offering is actually not just bringing it and leaving it with the priest, but that person is sacrificing the offering, cleaning the offering, all those things. Now, the priest has certain responsibilities. I hadn't really not ever thought about that before. A lot of times, I think the vision that we have is the priests are sacrificing all these animals every day, all day
The
long.
priest is just the town butcher for everybody.
Yeah, but what this is saying is that the people who are seeking forgiveness or bringing the offering, they are the ones who are handling the offering.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's not just forgive me. It's here's what I bring before you, and this is how I'm involved in it.
Yeah, and there's something very personal about that process. We, boy, not to really go into something that's not on the notes, but
Okay.
for LTC in the high school class, we've been reading Joshua chapter 5, kind of like Leviticus 17, brings up a topic that you're like, how do we talk about this? This is really weird. It's the new generation of circumcised going into Israel. And so I looked up some really good kind of little videos, the Bible Project one, but Tim Keller had a really good quote about it, and we talked about it. And he said, well, the process is bloody and gory and nasty and also at the same time very intimate. And he said that actually is pretty revealing to what sin does and what sin is. And I think the same is true when you are, I mean, if you're skinning and gutting and all that of the goat yourself, you're not just going, hey, here you go, here's my goat. It's pretty messy and it's pretty intimate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not just that, but you were the cause of this goat dying. I mean, it's not just when we talk about the atonement and what the Israelites did when they left Egypt. They were supposed to bring that animal into their house, keep it for a couple of weeks, right? It was kind of like a family pet in a way. So this is different. I mean, the way we look at things, the way we try to deal with sin and other things like that is we try to keep it at a distance. And this is very, like you said, very intimate and personal.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Lay your hands on, you slaughter, like, there's skin in the game, as we might say now, that you can't outsource this. It has to be something I personally do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you mentioned that it's very personal, it's very intimate, and it's something they have to take care of that God is going to spiritually sort of handle, but it's something they have to take into their own hands in a sense. Just another line thinking about holiness was, as I was thinking about that question of sin is brushed aside, nor is the sinner cast away, and how the church has kind of wrestled with that at times, thinking about that concept. And I've heard you guys use this phrasing before. We were known for what we stood against, more for what we stood for. We were sometimes known for the things we didn't like and the people who were all wrong and the people who didn't have it right and the things that were incorrect, more than people that, what do you actually believe? What is true for you? And I love that line of thinking. And when you come to Leviticus, as you pointed out, Leviticus does not believe with the thou shalt nots. There are thou shalt nots in the Bible. That's definitely in there.
And even Leviticus has plenty of thou shalt nots.
It's going to have plenty of them. But when he first starts, he actually says, here is how you should draw near to me.
Right.
And so it's actually very biblical for us to lean into the idea. It's very, very rooted in Scripture, to lean into saying, no, we should first tell people how they should draw near to God, and then later in the relationship define, hey, that means you might need to get rid of some things.
Right. Which I think that's how Leviticus is laid out on
Yeah.
purpose, is that it spends a lot of time talking about the offerings of here's how to approach God. And then here's what approaching God does to your life.
Right.
And that's, we'll get into that later.
Yeah, so I'll let Mitch keep some of the spoilers for his later sermons to himself. One thing about Jesus being these offering and priest is you highlight that passage from John 10:17, that Jesus is the offerer who gives himself up willingly.
Mhm.
You talked about how you dropped Michaela off at Winterfest. All the speakers did a great job, but on Sunday they had a kind of a different guy come up and give a communion thought, and he launched into what ended up being like a 15, 17, 18-minute allegory. And I kind of knew where it was going early on, but he's talking about how like this global plague, and it's worse than Corona, and it started and it's affecting everybody, and everybody is dying, and they need this specific kind of blood type to do it, and they come to this family, and yeah, long story short, it's about Jesus, right? It's about Jesus addressing sin. But in the allegory, he talks about how basically the people who are making the vaccine, they come to this dad and they take his son, and they basically his son has to die in order to make the vaccine. And I'm sitting here listening, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, man, I know for a fact the guy speaking has more degrees and probably more experience teaching the Bible than he's got more in one pinky than I do in my life, kind of thing. But I was like, there's a pretty big theological hang up with that to me. God didn't like kick Jesus out and have him drugged by a leash to the over and over. He says he gives himself up. I mean,
Right.
especially in John, he says, no, I lay down my life. No one takes it from me. I give this up of my own accord because I am the good shepherd who would willingly lay down his life for the flock. And I'm like, you've kind of turned this into some post-apocalyptic horror story that I'm not really a fan of. Yeah, just kind of giving the heebie-jeebies a little bit. But every allegory and illustration I get has a little hang-ups. But this one, I'm like, man, you're missing kind of a big point of this.
Well, and that's I think a lot of times we forget that. We know Jesus is the offering. We know he's the high priest. We've read Hebrews. But sometimes we forget that he is also the offerer. That he is all three. He's represented in all three. And then so are we. Like we are the offerer, we are the offering, Romans 12:1. But also we're the high priest. I'm not high priest. We are holy priest, holy nation. First Peter points to, and so there's that connection that we follow Jesus' lead, and I don't know. That's encouraging to me.
Yeah. Well, for those who were the video game players, which is nobody in this room, but he was a little bit of a Last of Us plot to his story that just had me really kind of weirded out. That I was like, I don't know if that's really the kind of Jesus or God that we want to be thinking about. Well, for the sake of, I guess, time, we won't want to go too long on our first episode, freak everybody out. But we'll throw a couple more things out there. You talked about this, just that idea that holiness is something that God invites us into.
Right.
I love that. Jesus is the better priest, which is, like as you said, the whole thing of Hebrews. You had a point kind of near the end where you said Jesus is talking about he offers himself up. He's the spotless lamb without blemish. He's the firstborn male without defect. And you kind of paused and you said Jesus is the firstborn male to Mary. And I could see, I feel like I've had that moment before as a preacher with that glint in your eye of like, what I just said is not entirely theologically correct, so I need to kind of correct it, but I also don't want to send us down a 40-minute detour in my lesson because I need to wrap up because it was getting close to the end.
It was, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, in that moment, what I heard myself, sometimes you're in that moment and you hear what you're saying rather than just thinking, like, wait a second, for one thought was, well, that could be like too spiritualized, like theological. Oh yeah, he's the firstborn of all creation. Like some people could go to some of those passages, and where I was really focusing on is he's literally physically the firstborn. So saying of Mary was part of that. The other side of it is the question of Jesus' half brothers and sisters. Of like, there's a lot to be said there of what does that mean, and where do they fit into this? And so there's just more details that I was like, yeah, I'm not going to get into. I'm just going to say of Mary to try to bring everyone on board of what I was trying to get across.
Yeah, because you get into, depending on who you ask, the brothers, the cousins, stepbrothers, half brothers. John uses that word. I believe it's the monogesis or the monogenes, and it's the one and only. It's where we see the only begotten in the very famous John 3:16. He's the only begotten of God. He is the only one of his kind. He's unique, and he's in a class of his own that no one else is similar to. And that's where Paul goes when he says the firstborn of the dead. Well, people pick on that, like, well, chronologically, Lazarus was raised, this other girl was raised, other people. I mean, going all the way back to the Old Testament, other people were raised from the dead. But he's saying, no. There's a not just chronological primacy, but there's something happening where he is the only one who does what he does. And that's something that, as you said, when we read Leviticus and we see the types, the echoes of Jesus, that's what we see. Is he's the only one who does what he does.
Right.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about holiness plenty as we keep kind of recapping sermons and revisiting this, the vision and the emphasis for the year, because we'll keep talking about it here. I wanted to get around to some just ongoing church news, things going on, some updates for anyone who might not have gotten the email, read the slides, saw the video, saw the pre-roll, heard the announcements, or seen any of the 5 different ways we have of communicating with people. I wanted to ask you a little bit, if you could tell us a little bit about the bilingual kind of Spanish-English panel, roundtable discussion, think tank that we're going to be starting up pretty soon.
What would you like me to tell you? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so basically it's an idea that we have right now. We've been the leadership here have been thinking a lot about how the English speakers, Spanish speakers work together. A lot of times what most of you will notice is that, we obviously the English speakers meet in one room, Spanish speakers meet in another room, and for worship. And while that is true, we actually do have some that are predominantly Spanish speaking that meet with us in the English speaking service, and some that are predominantly English speakers that meet in the Spanish speaking service. But how do we see ourselves together? Do we see ourselves as one church working together? And if so, how do we communicate better with each other? Because we really have realize that we do struggle with that idea of communication and being in traveling together as we go through these visions, these ideas of what our themes will be, all that other stuff. And so we want to improve those relationships, we want to improve the way that we as a church work together. And so what we're going to do is, and this is just at the very beginning stages, we haven't even got it all mapped out yet. We're going to try to have, for lack of a better term, a think tank of English speakers and Spanish speakers that come together and just talk through some of the issues that we may have with regard to our communication and things that we're dealing with. In addition to that, there's a book that the leadership is reading that's titled "The Future for the Latino Church," and it really focuses on the concept of how second and third generation Latinos are sometimes finding themselves kind of stuck in the middle, because what is happening is their first language is becoming English. For many of them, they may speak both Spanish and English, but third generation, a lot of them are not speaking Spanish much. And so they find themselves kind of caught in the middle. So how do we help those young people to connect? Because a lot of them, and you may have, heard some of the discussions in the past, or maybe read some articles about how our young people have a tendency to just disappear from church after they graduate. Well, the same thing's happening with this Spanish speakers. And so, and even to a greater extent. And so what we're trying to do is look forward, and how do we need to work together to help our people stay connected and to work together as two languages, and to support each other and encourage each other with whatever we're working with or going through. So
that's a big thing.
Yeah.
You said you guys don't really have a date on when you're starting, but you're kind of in the planning,
No,
gathering
it's in the
stages.
process. So for instance, on Wednesday night, there's a young adult group that meets from the Spanish speaking side of the congregation, and then we've got some young adults that are just English speakers too, but we don't have anything established with us. And so what we're doing is we're meeting together Wednesday night to talk about having a class to bring everybody together, and then maybe see what kind of grows out of that. And so but that's not a part of the think tank. That's just another aspect of this, if that makes sense. So yeah, we're in the beginning stages and trying to figure out where we're going to go with it. And I have no idea how long it's going to take us.
All right, so we'll expect to hear more about that in the coming days and weeks. Then, uh, did you guys know about the buddy bench thing before Giles sent the email?
I'm not sure I
Well,
did, to be honest.
I think didn't we hear it at the men's breakfast? Or did he already send the email?
It got mentioned a couple times, so I wanted to share this just for the people who don't know. Story Elementary is the elementary school just up the road from us, from where we're at in Sherman, and this coming Friday, into the Friday morning men's breakfast group, they're going to host a team of students, like elementary school students from Story, and they're going to make like a little presentation about this idea they had, and it was to kind of prevent bullying, to include others, and it's this concept of installing these little benches at different parts of the elementary school campus that are known where if someone needs a friend or they're feeling alone or they just want someone to talk to, they can go sit down and there will be like coaches or designated buddies or peer leaders, however that works internally, who can come and sit, who know what that means, and they're going to come sit with them on the bench. And it kind of is meant as this anti-bullying, anti-social isolation kind of thing. And apparently this idea was all the kids themselves. I think it's really neat. So they're going to come and they're kind of talking to other nonprofits, other organizations, but they're going to come and talk to the church and basically do their little presentation on what it is and what they might be looking for funding wise. So we have the regular Friday morning men's breakfast that's going to be there, and they're going to hear that. And I just think that's kind of neat. They said that the women's group is doing cooking breakfast for everybody that day. They've already collected some kind of funds as like a special collection for this, which is neat. And then if this does well, apparently the ISD has a plan to do similar things at other elementary schools. So I think it's pretty cool.
I'm planning on coming to that breakfast on Friday.
So yeah, there you go.
Tell Reese. Make sure Reese knows I'm coming.
Make sure reason. So we've got that Friday. What's coming up Sunday? Other than snow.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on what the weather has for us. If the weather holds out, we will be talking about holy priesthood in Leviticus 8, the consecration of the priests, and what that means for Jesus, what that means for us. But if it does decide to snow and the elders decide to cancel services, then we will pivot and we will do something that you will be able to get on live stream. And I think Terrance has agreed to at least do a communion talk or a devotional kind of extended that we can share. And so that we can worship together that way if we have to be snowed in. So that's all I know coming up. And then I guess we'll see what, what the weather does.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll see everybody Sunday. And yeah, if weather permits, if not, people can check.
Social media is going to be one place where we will place, if we cancel, we will send an email. We might try to work, we will do stuff through the app if you have notifications turned on there. But basically, we're going to try every way that we can to let people know if we're canceled on services.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone who found us, who's listening to this, our first kind of trial balloon episode to the Western Heights Community Podcast. And we look forward to, if we're not snowed in, to seeing you in the pew on Sunday.
Man,